I thought I was walking into another ordinary Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Instead, I found myself facing what felt like a firing squad. My brother Marcus stood by the fireplace, my father Gerald sat rigid in his leather armchair, and my mother Patricia avoided eye contact completely. The dining room felt colder than the October air outside. Marcus pointed an accusing finger at me and shouted those words that would change everything. "You're the reason this family is falling apart." I tried to speak, tried to defend myself, but my father cut me off with the most devastating words I'd ever heard. "We'd all be better off without you, Nelson." The silence that followed my father's words stretched like a chasm between us. I stood there in the doorway of the home where I'd grown up watching three people I loved, more than life itself, stare at me with cold indifference. Marcus crossed his arms, satisfaction spreading across his face like he'd finally won some competition I didn't know we were having. Gerald adjusted his reading glasses and picked up his newspaper as if I'd already vanished. Patricia finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't anger like I expected. It was something closer to fear. "So that's it then," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Nobody responded. Nobody even acknowledged I'd spoken. I turned and walked out, closing the door behind me with the gentlest click I could manage. Even in my devastation, I couldn't bring myself to slam it. As I sat in my Honda Civic in their driveway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I replayed the last 6 months in my mind, trying to understand how we'd reached this point. It all started when I began noticing irregularities in the books for Morrison Construction, the family business my father had built from nothing over 30 years. As the company's certified public accountant, I handled all the financial records, tax filings, and client account management. What began as minor discrepancies gradually revealed themselves as something much more sinister. The first red flag appeared in March when I noticed a $15,000 deposit from the Henderson family's kitchen renovation project that never made it to the designated escrow account. When I brought this to my father's attention, he brushed it off as a banking error and assured me he'd handle it personally. But the money never appeared, and when I pressed the issue, Gerald became defensive and told me to focus on my own responsibilities. Then came the Williams account. They'd paid a $28,000 deposit for a complete bathroom remodel, but the funds disappeared from our system within 48 hours. The paperwork showed my electronic signature authorizing the transfer, but I had no memory of processing it. When I confronted Gerald about this, he accused me of being careless with my login credentials and suggested maybe I wasn't cut out for the family business after all. The breaking point came in September when I discovered my CPA license number had been used to legitimize a series of fraudulent transactions I knew nothing about. Someone had been forging my digital signature on financial documents, creating fake invoices, and using my professional credentials to steal client deposits. The paper trail led directly to accounts my father controlled, but when I presented this evidence, the family turned against me like I was the criminal. Marcus, who served as the company's project manager, accused me of trying to sabotage the business out of jealousy. He claimed I resented his position as Gerald's heir apparent and was manufacturing problems to make him look incompetent. My mother sided with them, suggesting I was going through some kind of psychological crisis and needed professional help rather than access to sensitive financial information. The more questions I asked, the more hostile they became. Family dinners turned into interrogation sessions where I found myself defending my competence and mental state instead of discussing the missing money. They painted me as paranoid, vindictive, and unstable. Gerald even threatened to fire me and find a replacement accountant who could work without creating family drama. But I couldn't ignore what I'd discovered. My forensic analysis revealed a pattern of systematic theft spanning at least 2 years. Client deposits were being diverted into personal accounts. Construction materials were being purchased with company funds but delivered to private projects, and subcontractor payments were being inflated with the difference disappearing into offshore accounts. The total amount stolen exceeded $400,000. The worst part was realizing how sophisticated the operation had become. Someone with intimate knowledge of accounting practices and construction industry norms had designed this scheme. The fraudulent transactions were carefully timed to avoid detection during busy periods, and the amounts were calculated to stay below reporting thresholds that would trigger automatic audits. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was organized financial crime. Gerald had been using my professional reputation and license to legitimize his criminal enterprise. Every forged signature, every false document, every fraudulent transaction carried my credentials. If authorities discovered this scheme, I would be the first person they'd investigate. My career, my livelihood, and my freedom were all at risk because someone in my family was destroying innocent people's lives for profit. The clients being victimized weren't wealthy corporations that could absorb losses. They were working families saving for years to afford home improvements. Elderly couples on fixed incomes investing their life savings in making their homes safer and more comfortable. Young parents stretching their budgets to create better spaces for their children. Gerald was stealing dream security and peace of mind from people who trusted him. When I threatened to report the fraud to authorities, the family's response was swift and brutal. Gerald accused me of betraying the family name for personal gain. Marcus claimed I was having a nervous breakdown and couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. Patricia suggested I take a leave of absence to get my head straightened out. They closed ranks against me, treating me like the enemy rather than someone trying to protect innocent victims. The intervention I walked into tonight was their final solution. They'd decided the easiest way to handle their problem wasn't to stop stealing, but to silence the witness. By driving me away from the family and the business, they could continue their criminal activities without interference. They'd calculated that my love for them would keep me quiet even after they cast me out. As I started my car and pulled out of their driveway for what I knew would be the last time, I felt something I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just heartbreak or anger. It was clarity. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I had to do. 3 weeks passed in complete silence. I threw myself into my other accounting clients, trying to rebuild a life that didn't revolve around Morrison Construction or the Morrison family. My small apartment felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. Every morning I woke up hoping for a text or call that never came. Every evening I resisted the urge to drive by their house or the construction office. The knock on my door came on a Tuesday morning at 7:30. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people in dark suits holding official-looking folders. My stomach dropped as I recognized the unmistakable appearance of federal agents. When I opened the door, the woman showed me her credentials. Mr. Nelson Morrison, I'm Agent Sarah Rodriguez with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Agent Michael Chen. We'd like to speak with you about Morrison Construction and some financial irregularities we've been investigating. My mouth went dry, but I invited them in. Agent Rodriguez was probably in her early 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything in my modest living room. Agent Chen appeared younger, maybe early 30s, and carried a briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain substantial documentation. We know this must be overwhelming. Agent Rodriguez began settling into my worn couch with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. We've been investigating suspicious financial activity connected to Morrison Construction for the past 8 months. Your CPA license number has appeared on numerous questionable transactions. The blood drained from my face. This was exactly what I'd feared most. I need you to understand something. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I discovered those irregularities myself and tried to report them internally. That's why my family cut me off. Agent Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We know, he said simply. We've been monitoring the situation longer than you might think. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. The agents explained that their investigation began when Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old widow, filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau about Morrison Construction. She'd paid $35,000 for a complete bathroom renovation to make her home safer for aging in place. The work was never completed. The workers never returned, and when she tried to contact the company, she was told her deposit had been applied to materials that were allegedly damaged and unusable. Margaret's daughter researched the company and discovered similar complaints from other families. She contacted state consumer protection agencies, which eventually flagged the pattern for federal attention because the fraudulent transactions crossed state lines and involved digital financial instruments. The Thompson family's complaint led us to examine your company's financial records, Agent Rodriguez explained. We obtained warrants for banking information, digital transaction logs, and business correspondence. What we found was significantly more extensive than Mrs. Thompson's case. Agent Chen spread documents across my coffee table, bank statements, transaction records, email communications, and copies of forged documents bearing my electronic signature. The scope was breathtaking and terrifying. We've identified 17 families who've been defrauded over the past 24 months, Agent Chen continued. Total losses exceed $600,000. The sophisticated nature of the operation suggests someone with advanced knowledge of accounting practices and construction industry regulations. My heart pounded as I stared at the evidence. Seeing my professional credentials attached to crimes I never committed felt like watching someone wear my face while committing robbery. I documented everything I found, I told them. I have copies of my own investigation. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. We hoped you'd say that. Mr. Morrison, we believe you're a victim in this case, not a perpetrator. Someone has been using your professional identity to legitimize criminal activity. We'd like your cooperation in bringing the real perpetrators to justice. The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by a devastating realization. The agents weren't just talking about abstract financial crimes. They were talking about my father, my brother. People I'd loved my entire life were destroying innocent families for money, and they'd been using my reputation to do it. The elderly clients are the ones that concern us most, Agent Rodriguez said gently. Mrs. Thompson used her late husband's life insurance money for that renovation. She wanted to stay in the home where they'd been happy for 53 years. The Kowalski family emptied their children's college funds to add a wheelchair-accessible bathroom for their disabled son. The Martinez family borrowed against their retirement savings to repair damage from a house fire. Each story hit me like a physical blow. These weren't abstract victims. They were real people with real dreams who'd trusted my family and been betrayed in the worst possible way. Gerald and Marcus weren't just stealing money. They were stealing hope, security, and dignity from vulnerable people. There's something else you need to know, Agent Chen said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. We have evidence suggesting the operation is expanding. Recent transactions indicate they're moving into larger commercial projects and more sophisticated money laundering techniques. If this continues, the losses could reach several $million. The agents offered me immunity from prosecution in exchange for my cooperation as a witness and informant. They needed someone with intimate knowledge of the company's operations and access to internal communications. The prospect of testifying against my own family felt like betraying everything I'd been raised to believe about loyalty and blood bonds. But as I looked at the photographs of victims, the agents showed me Mrs. Thompson's weathered hands shaking as she signed documents, the Kowalski family's young son in his wheelchair, Mr. Martinez's proud smile as he showed the plans for rebuilding his fire-damaged home. I knew what I had to do. These people trusted my family, I said quietly. They deserved better than what they got. If helping you means they get their money back and nobody else gets hurt, then yes, I'll cooperate. Agent Rodriguez explained the process. I would wear recording devices during any contact with family members. I would provide copies of all financial documents and internal communications. Most importantly, I would attempt to re-establish contact with the family to gather additional evidence of ongoing criminal activity. We understand this is asking a lot, she said. Working as an informant against family members is one of the most difficult things we ask civilians to do. But you have a unique opportunity to prevent these crimes from continuing and to help victims recover their losses. As the agents prepared to leave, Agent Chen handed me a secure phone for emergency contact. Mr. Morrison, what you're doing takes real courage. A lot of people in your situation would choose family loyalty over justice. The fact that you're willing to do the right thing even when it's this hard speaks well of your character. After they left, I sat in my empty apartment staring at the phone and recording equipment they'd given me. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reconnecting with my family, not as their son and brother, but as an undercover federal informant. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had rejected me for questioning their integrity would welcome me back, never knowing I was there to expose their crimes. That night, I drafted the text message that would begin my return to their lives and their eventual downfall. Dad, Marcus, I've been thinking about what happened. Maybe you were right. Maybe I was out of line. Could we talk? The response came faster than I expected. Gerald texted back within 2 hours, "Son, we hoped you'd come around. Family dinner Sunday at 6, your mother's making pot roast." The casual warmth of his message made my stomach churn. After 3 weeks of complete silence, he was acting like nothing had happened. No acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, no apology for the cruel words, no recognition that they'd driven me away from the only family I'd ever known. Just an assumption that I'd crawl back when I got tired of being independent. Sunday couldn't come fast enough and couldn't come slowly enough. I spent the week reviewing my instructions with Agent Rodriguez, practicing natural conversation while wearing hidden recording equipment and mentally preparing to face people I loved who'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. The wire was smaller than I'd expected, a tiny device that attached to my chest beneath my shirt with medical-grade adhesive. The backup recorder, disguised as a pen, went in my shirt pocket. Agent Rodriguez assured me the technology was sophisticated enough to capture clear audio, even in challenging environments. "Remember," she said during our final briefing, "your goal is to get them talking about the business operations, financial procedures, and any recent transactions. Don't push too hard. Let them volunteer information naturally. People like your father often can't resist bragging about their cleverness once they think they've won." Driving to my parents' house felt like traveling to my own execution. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood seemed different somehow, like I was seeing them through the eyes of a stranger. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Marcus's pickup truck parked beside my father's sedan. The whole family would be there for my official reconciliation. Patricia answered the door with a smile that seemed genuine but strained. She hugged me tighter than usual, and I caught her wiping her eyes as she led me into the living room. Whatever anger she'd shown during the intervention had been replaced by something that looked like relief mixed with guilt. "Nelson, welcome home," Gerald said from his chair, but he didn't get up. The message was clear. I was the one who'd made the mistake, so I was the one who needed to make amends. Marcus stood by the fireplace again, exactly where he'd been during the intervention. "Glad you came to your senses," he said with a smirk that made me want to punch him. Running a business requires trust, and trust requires family loyalty. The irony of him lecturing me about trust while stealing from innocent families wasn't lost on me, but I forced myself to nod apologetically. "You're right. I let my concerns get out of hand. I should have trusted your judgment instead of questioning every little thing." Gerald's expression softened slightly. "That's what we wanted to hear. This business has been good to our family for 30 years. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, but everything we do is for the greater good of Morrison Construction and the Morrison name." During dinner, the conversation stayed safely focused on neutral topics. Patricia's pot roast, Marcus's latest hunting trip, Gerald's plans for expanding the business into commercial projects. But I noticed subtle changes in their dynamic. Marcus and Gerald exchanged meaningful looks when certain topics came up. Patricia seemed more withdrawn than usual, participating in conversation, but lacking her normal enthusiasm. After dinner, Gerald invited Marcus and me into his home office for what he called a business discussion. This was exactly what Agent Rodriguez had hoped for. The office was where Gerald kept his personal files, conducted private phone calls, and planned the operations I was supposed to be documenting. "Nelson, Since you're back in the fold, I want you to know how well we've been managing things in your absence. Gerald began settling behind his mahogany desk with obvious satisfaction. Marcus has really stepped up his project management, and we've implemented some new financial procedures that have dramatically improved our profit margins. Marcus pulled up a chair beside me. We've been more creative about maximizing each project's potential, he said with obvious pride. Instead of limiting ourselves to the original contract specifications, we've found ways to generate additional revenue streams. My skin crawled as I realized they were about to confess to federal crimes while I recorded every word. Gerald opened a file cabinet and pulled out a ledger I'd never seen before. "This is what you were missing in your analysis," Gerald said, spreading the ledger on his desk. "You were only looking at the official project accounts. But smart business requires maintaining flexibility for unexpected opportunities." The ledger contained what appeared to be a complete record of their criminal activities. Client names, deposit amounts, transfer dates, and final destinations for stolen funds. It was organized with the same attention to detail Gerald applied to legitimate business operations. Take the Henderson's Kitchen project. Marcus continued, pointing to an entry in the ledger. They paid $15,000 up front, but the actual material costs were only $8,000. Instead of returning the difference or applying it to labor, we redirected it to the expansion fund. Expansion fund. I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite my horror. Gerald smiled with obvious satisfaction. Commercial projects require significant upfront capital. Rather than taking out business loans and paying interest to banks, we've been using residential deposits to fund our commercial growth. It's brilliant financial management. They weren't just stealing from individual families. They were using those stolen funds to expand their criminal operation into larger commercial projects where the potential losses could be exponentially greater. What started as individual family tragedies was becoming a major financial crime syndicate. "The beauty of the system is the diversity," Marcus explained. "Residential clients expect delays and change orders so they don't question modified timelines. Commercial clients focus on end results rather than interim financing. By the time any individual client realizes there's a problem, we've completed multiple other projects and have plenty of liquidity to handle complaints." Gerald nodded approvingly at his son's explanation. "Marcus understands the big picture in a way you never did, Nelson. You were always worried about individual transactions instead of seeing the overall business strategy. The casual way they discussed destroying people's lives was almost more disturbing than the crimes themselves. These weren't desperate people driven to crime by circumstances. They were calculating predators who'd turned theft into a business model. Of course, none of this would be possible without proper documentation." Gerald continued, pulling out another file. "Having your CPA credentials available has been invaluable for legitimizing complex transactions." My blood ran cold. They were still using my professional license for ongoing crimes. Even after driving me away, they were continuing to forge my signature and use my credentials to steal from new victims. "You've been using my license while I was gone?" I asked, struggling to keep accusation out of my voice. Marcus laughed. "Your electronic signature has been very cooperative. Amazing how much business you can conduct without actually being present." Just then, there was a soft knock on the office door. "Excuse me?" came a voice I didn't recognize. A young man I'd never seen before entered the office carrying a laptop and several folders. "Jake, perfect timing," Gerald said warmly. "Nelson, meet your cousin Jake Morrison. He's been helping us manage the books since you've been away." Jake appeared to be in his late 20s with sandy brown hair and an earnest demeanor that reminded me of myself at that age. He shook my hand with what seemed like genuine friendliness, but something in his eyes made me pause. There was an alertness there that didn't match his casual appearance. "Jake's been invaluable," Marcus said. "He's got a real talent for creative accounting solutions." "I just try to help where I can," Jake replied modestly. "Your father and brother have taught me a lot about maximizing operational efficiency." As Jake opened his laptop and began showing Gerald some financial reports, something about his movements seemed oddly familiar. The way he organized documents, the methodical approach to data presentation, the professional terminology he used. It reminded me of federal agents preparing evidence presentations. Then Jake did something that made my heart stop. While Gerald and Marcus focused on the laptop screen, Jake caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was so subtle I might have imagined it, but combined with the strange sense of familiarity, it triggered a shocking realization. Jake wasn't my cousin. Jake was law enforcement. The FBI investigation was far more sophisticated than Agent Rodriguez had revealed. They hadn't just been monitoring Morrison Construction from the outside. They'd infiltrated the operation with an undercover agent who'd been gathering evidence from inside the family business for months. Jake's efficiency reports have been fascinating. Gerald continued oblivious to the bombshell that had just exploded in my mind. He's identified profit optimization opportunities we never considered. I struggled to maintain my composure as the full implications sank in. While I'd been agonizing over whether to cooperate with federal investigators, they'd already placed an undercover agent in position to document ongoing crimes. My family had been confessing to a federal agent showing him evidence and involving him in their criminal planning without the slightest suspicion. The conversation continued for another hour with Gerald and Marcus proudly explaining their expanded operations to both their returned accountant son and their secret federal agent cousin. They detailed new victims, larger thefts, and increasingly sophisticated money laundering techniques, all while Jake quietly documented everything with his laptop. As the evening wound down, Jake gathered his materials and prepared to leave. "I'll have those efficiency reports ready for your review tomorrow," he told Gerald. "Excellent work as always," Gerald replied. "Nelson, you should spend some time with Jake this week. He might have some insights about modern accounting techniques that could help you adapt to our new operational methods." After Jake left, I helped Patricia clear the dinner dishes while Gerald and Marcus continued their business discussion. As I loaded the dishwasher, my mother moved beside me and spoke in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. "I'm glad you're back," she said, but her tone carried undertones I couldn't interpret. "These past few weeks have been very difficult." I looked at her more closely. Patricia seemed tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her hand shook slightly as she handed me plates, and I noticed she'd lost weight since I'd been gone. "Are you feeling okay, Mom?" I asked gently. She glanced toward the office where Gerald and Marcus were still talking, then looked back at me with something that might have been fear. "Some things are harder to live with than others," she said cryptically. Before I could ask what she meant, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Nelson, Dad wants to discuss your official return to the company tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock at the office." As I drove home that night, my mind raced with everything I'd learned. My family's criminal operation was far more extensive than I'd imagined. They were using my identity for ongoing crimes. An undercover federal agent had been documenting their activities for months, and my mother seemed to be struggling with some internal conflict I didn't understand. Most disturbing was the realization that my absence hadn't slowed their criminal activity at all. If anything, they seemed more confident and organized than before. Whatever the FBI was planning, it needed to happen soon. Every day of delay meant more families being victimized and more evidence of crimes committed using my professional credentials. The phone started ringing at 5:47 in the morning. Groggy and disoriented, I let the first call go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the time I fully woke up and grabbed my phone, I had 12 missed calls from the same number. My blood turned to ice when I saw the caller identification Regional Medical Center. I called back immediately, my hands shaking as I pressed the numbers. The voice that answered was professional, but urgent. "Mr. Morrison, this is Rebecca Walsh, head nurse in the cardiac intensive care unit. Your father, Gerald Morrison, was brought in by ambulance approximately 3 hours ago. You're listed as his emergency contact. We need you here as soon as possible." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and worst-case scenarios. My mind couldn't process what was happening. Just 12 hours ago, Gerald had been sitting in his office, showing off his criminal enterprise, like a proud grandfather displaying photos. Now he was in cardiac intensive care, and I was racing through empty streets at 6:30 in the morning. The ICU was a maze of machines, monitors, and medical staff moving with quiet urgency. Nurse Walsh met me at the entrance, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the practiced manner of someone who delivered terrible news as part of her daily routine. "Your father suffered a massive myocardial infarction," she explained as she led me toward his room. In layman's terms, a severe heart attack. The paramedics were able to restore cardiac function, but he's in critical condition. What caused it? I asked, though part of me was already dreading the answer. Extreme stress appears to have been a contributing factor, she said carefully. The attack occurred during what witnesses described as a very traumatic event at his workplace. I found Marcus and my mother in the family waiting area, both looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Patricia sat hunched in a plastic chair, clutching a cup of coffee with trembling hands. Marcus paced by the window, his face a mask of fury and grief. "Nelson," Patricia said when she saw me rising unsteadily to embrace me. "Thank God you're here." Marcus spun around from the window, and I saw an expression I'd never seen on my brother's face before. It wasn't grief or concern. It was pure rage, and it was directed at me. "You son of a bitch," he snarled, advancing toward me with clenched fists. "This is your fault, all of it." "Marcus, stop," Patricia said weakly, but he ignored her. "The FBI raided the office this morning." Marcus continued, his voice rising with each word. "They had warrants, Nelson. Federal warrants for everything. Dad was trying to destroy files when he collapsed. This is what your vindictive revenge has accomplished." The world tilted sideways. The FBI had executed their raids while I was here dealing with Gerald's medical emergency. The timing couldn't have been coincidental. Something had triggered them to move faster than originally planned. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. "Don't lie to me," Marcus shouted, drawing attention from other families in the waiting area. "Federal agents don't just magically develop interest in small construction companies. They don't obtain detailed financial records without inside information. You fed them everything, didn't you?" 2 security guards appeared at the waiting area entrance, obviously responding to Marcus's raised voice. Patricia stood between us, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged. "Your father is fighting for his life 20 feet away, and you're screaming at each other like children." That's when Agent Rodriguez appeared, flanked by 2 other federal agents I didn't recognize. Her presence confirmed Marcus's worst suspicions and sealed my fate as the family traitor. "Mr. Nelson Morrison," she said professionally, "we need to speak with you privately." Marcus stared at me with something beyond hatred. "You're working with them," he said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're actually working with federal agents against your own family." I couldn't deny it anymore. The evidence was standing right there in government suits with federal badges. "Marcus, let me explain." I started, but he cut me off with a gesture of pure disgust. "Explain what? How you decided to destroy your father's life work, how you chose strangers over your own blood, how you put Dad in that hospital bed." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Marcus Morrison, I'm Agent Sarah Rodriguez with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have some questions about Morrison Construction's financial activities. You have the right to remain silent." "Are you arresting me?" Marcus asked, his rage suddenly replaced by a different kind of fear. "That depends on your willingness to cooperate," Agent Rodriguez replied evenly. "We have extensive documentation of financial fraud, and we know you've been actively involved in the day-to-day operations." Marcus looked between the federal agents and me, finally understanding that his world was collapsing around him. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the waiting room. He lunged at me with his fist raised, screaming profanities and accusations. Hospital security and federal agents converged on him simultaneously. Marcus swung wildly, connecting with my jaw before being tackled to the ground by 3 different people. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the waiting area as other families stared in shock. Marcus Morrison, you're under arrest for assault and federal conspiracy charges, Agent Rodriguez announced as Marcus was hauled to his feet. You have the right to remain silent. As they led my brother away, he turned back toward me with a look of absolute betrayal. I hope it was worth it. Nelson, he said. I hope destroying your family was worth whatever they promised you. Patricia collapsed back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her younger son being arrested, while her husband fought for his life in intensive care. I knelt beside her, trying to offer comfort, but she pulled away from my touch. What have you done? She whispered. What have you done to our family? Agent Rodriguez approached us carefully. Mrs. Morrison, I understand this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss some important matters. Your husband's medical emergency occurred during the execution of federal search warrants. He was attempting to destroy evidence when he suffered his heart attack. Evidence of what? Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Financial fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Agent Rodriguez replied gently. We have documentation showing systematic theft from construction clients over a period of at least 2 years. The total amount stolen exceeds $600,000. Patricia's reaction surprised me. Instead of shock or denial, she simply nodded, as if confirming something she'd known all along. Agent Rodriguez continued her briefing. The search warrants covered Morrison Construction's office financial records, computer systems, and personal assets. We've also frozen business accounts pending investigation. Your son Nelson's cooperation has been invaluable in understanding the scope of these crimes. How long have you known? Patricia asked me, her voice barely audible. I suspected something was wrong 6 months ago, I admitted. I tried to handle it within the family first, but when I realized innocent people were being hurt, I couldn't stay silent. Innocent people, Patricia repeated slowly. Like the Thompson family. Both Agent Rodriguez and I stared at her in surprise. How did my mother know about Margaret Thompson? Mrs. Morrison, Agent Rodriguez said carefully, what do you know about the Thompson family? Patricia looked up at us with eyes that held more pain than I'd ever seen in another human being. Margaret Thompson is my sister, she said quietly. Gerald stole $35,000 from my own sister, and I've been living with that knowledge for 8 months. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Gerald hadn't just been stealing from random clients. He'd defrauded his own sister-in-law, my aunt, a woman I'd known my entire life, and Patricia had known about it all along. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Rodriguez said gently, we're going to need to discuss this in detail. Your information could be crucial to our investigation. As federal agents, hospital staff, and family members swirled around me in organized chaos, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family had been wrong. Gerald wasn't just a man who'd made bad business decisions. He was a predator who'd stolen from his own relatives. Marcus wasn't just a loyal son defending the family business. He was a willing participant in systematic fraud. And Patricia wasn't an innocent victim caught in the middle. She was someone who'd been carrying terrible secrets while watching her family destroy itself. The man fighting for his life in the intensive care unit wasn't the father I'd grown up admiring. He was a criminal whose crimes had finally caught up with him. And I was the son who'd chosen justice over family loyalty, not knowing that justice was exactly what my family needed most. Gerald remained unconscious for 3 days. The doctors explained that his heart attack had been massive, affecting multiple areas of cardiac muscle, and his recovery would depend on factors beyond medical intervention. Patricia rarely left his bedside, maintaining a vigil that seemed driven by obligation rather than affection. Marcus had been released on bond pending trial, but a restraining order prevented him from contacting me directly. Through our lawyers, he made it clear that he considered me responsible for both Gerald's condition and the family's legal troubles. The bridge between us hadn't just been burned, it had been obliterated. On Thursday afternoon, while I sat in the ICU waiting room reading court documents related to the federal charges, Patricia appeared beside me, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen her. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. "But not here. Can you come to the house tonight?" The Morrison family home felt different when I arrived that evening. The warm familiarity that had defined my childhood had been replaced by an atmosphere of secrets and sorrow. Patricia led me to the basement to Gerald's workshop, where he'd always insisted nobody else was allowed. She pulled a key from her pocket and unlocked a filing cabinet I'd never noticed before. Inside were hundreds of documents, photographs, letters, and financial records organized with the same meticulous attention to detail Gerald applied to his business operations. "I've been keeping records for 2 years," Patricia said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "Ever since I realized what he was doing to Margaret." The files contained everything: client contracts with Gerald's original honest estimates alongside the fraudulent bills that were actually sent. Photographs of construction projects showing work that was never completed, despite full payment. Copies of forged documents bearing my electronic signature. Bank records showing the flow of stolen money into personal accounts. But most shocking were the letters. Dozens of them addressed to Patricia from victims' family members pleading for help, explanations, or simple acknowledgement of their losses. Mrs. Thompson's daughter had written multiple times describing her mother's deteriorating mental health after losing her life savings. The Kowalski family had detailed their son's medical needs that couldn't be met after their renovation funds were stolen. Mr. Martinez had explained how his family was living in a damaged house because they couldn't afford to hire another contractor. "They wrote to me because Gerald wouldn't respond to their calls," Patricia explained. "They thought maybe his wife could help them understand what had happened to their money." Each letter was a knife to the heart, but Patricia had kept them all. More than that, she'd researched each case documenting the specific harm done to every family Gerald had victimized. "Why didn't you report him?" I asked, struggling to understand how she could have known all this and remained silent. Patricia sat heavily in Gerald's workshop chair, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's crimes. "At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe poor record-keeping or miscommunication with clients. But when I found the forged signatures and offshore accounts, I knew it was intentional." She pulled out another file, this one containing what appeared to be divorce papers that had never been filed. "I consulted a lawyer 18 months ago," she continued. "I was going to leave him and report the crimes myself, but then I realized that stopping Gerald wouldn't help the families who'd already been hurt. They needed their money back, not just justice." The next file contained correspondence with victim families, but not complaints. These were letters from Patricia using a post office box address offering assistance and hope. She'd been secretly working with affected families to document their losses and gather evidence for potential legal action. "I've been building a case," she said simply. "Not just against Gerald, but for the victims. Complete documentation of every crime, every stolen dollar, every family that was hurt. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, justice would be swift and complete." The scope of her secret investigation was breathtaking. Financial analysis, legal research, victim advocacy, and evidence preservation. For 2 years, while pretending to be the loyal wife of a successful businessman, Patricia had been conducting her own federal investigation. "The FBI approached me 6 months before they contacted you," she revealed. "Agent Rodriguez knew about my documentation from the victim families I'd been helping, but she needed someone with access to current business operations." My mind reeled as I processed this revelation. "You knew about the federal investigation all along." "I helped design it," Patricia said quietly. "The agents needed inside access to ongoing crimes, but they also needed someone who could safely document Gerald's current activities without arousing suspicion. When you started asking questions about the financial irregularities, I knew you were the key to stopping him." The intervention, the family meeting where they'd rejected me, the cruel words that had driven me away from home, none of it had been real. It had been theater designed to make me desperate enough to cooperate with federal agents while giving Gerald and Marcus false confidence about their security. The things Dad said to me? I started, but Patricia cut me off with a wave of her hand. Were carefully scripted to achieve the desired result, she said. I needed you angry enough to work with the FBI, but I also needed Gerald and Marcus to believe they'd successfully silenced the threat you represented. But the last 3 weeks you let me think my family had abandoned me, I said, hurt and confusion warring in my voice. Patricia's expression softened. Nelson, if you'd known the truth, you could never have acted naturally around them. Gerald has always been able to read you like a book. The only way this could work was if your emotions were genuine. She was right, of course. If I'd known that my rejection was staged, that my mother was secretly working with federal agents, that my exile from the family was part of a larger plan for justice, I never could have convinced Gerald and Marcus that I was genuinely seeking reconciliation. There's something else you need to know, Patricia continued, pulling out a final file. Jake Morrison, your supposed cousin who's been helping with the books. He's FBI, I said. I figured that out during Sunday dinner. He's more than that, Patricia said. He's a forensic accountant who specializes in family business fraud. He's been building the criminal case while gathering evidence for civil asset forfeiture. Every dollar Gerald stole is going to be recovered and returned to the families he victimized. The plan was far more sophisticated than anything I'd imagined. While I'd been agonizing over betraying my family, a complete law enforcement operation had been unfolding around me. Federal agents, undercover operatives, victim advocates, and my own mother had been working together to bring down Gerald's criminal enterprise and ensure justice for everyone he'd hurt. The timing of the raid this morning wasn't coincidental, Patricia continued. Gerald was planning to transfer the remaining stolen funds offshore this week. We had to move before he could hide the money where victims couldn't recover it. So his heart attack, I began dreading the answer, happened when he realized the scope of what we'd discovered, Patricia finished. When federal agents walked into his office with copies of every crime he'd committed, evidence of every dollar he'd stolen, and documentation of every family he'd hurt, he understood that his 30-year career of theft was over. As I absorbed the full magnitude of what my mother had orchestrated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: pride in my family. Not the criminal enterprise Gerald had built, but the courage and integrity Patricia had shown in tearing it down. Mom, I said quietly, what happens now? Patricia stood and began organizing the files back into their cabinet. Now we testify. We make sure every stolen dollar gets returned to the families who needed it. We help rebuild the lives Gerald destroyed, and we try to create something positive from this nightmare. What about us? What about our family? Patricia locked the cabinet and turned to face me. Nelson, our real family started the day you decided to protect innocent people instead of covering up crimes. Everything else was just people who happened to share our name. As we walked upstairs together, I realized that the intervention 3 weeks ago had accomplished exactly what it was designed to do. It had separated me from criminals and connected me with the people who shared my values. The family I'd thought I was betraying had never really existed. The family I was protecting had been there all along. 8 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Springfield buzzed with an energy I'd never experienced before. The United States vs. Gerald Morrison had drawn attention from legal scholars, victim advocacy groups, and media outlets covering white-collar crime. What started as a simple construction fraud case had evolved into a landmark prosecution of family business corruption. Gerald had survived his heart attack but emerged as a shadow of his former self. The confident, commanding presence that had defined my father for 48 years had been replaced by a frail man who seemed bewildered by the scope of charges against him. His legal team had initially attempted to negotiate a plea agreement, but the federal prosecutors, armed with overwhelming evidence, refused to consider anything less than full accountability. I sat in the witness preparation room reviewing my testimony with Assistant United States Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a woman in her 40s whose reputation for prosecuting complex financial crimes was legendary. Agent Rodriguez sat beside her, occasionally adding details about evidence collection or procedural requirements. Remember, Attorney Walsh said, your role is to explain the family business operations, describe how you discovered the fraudulent activities, and detail your attempts to address the problems internally before contacting law enforcement. Keep your answers factual and specific. Don't speculate about motives or emotions. The courtroom was packed when I was called to testify. Patricia sat in the front row, her expression supportive, but serious. Marcus was notably absent. His own legal troubles had resulted in a separate plea agreement that required him to testify against Gerald in exchange for reduced charges. Taking the oath felt surreal, promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about crimes committed by the man who taught me right from wrong seemed like the ultimate irony. Attorney Walsh led me through my background, my role in the family business, and my professional credentials. Then we moved into the heart of the matter, my discovery of the systematic fraud and my family's response to my concerns. Mr. Morrison, she said, can you describe what you observed regarding the Henderson family's kitchen renovation project? I noticed that their $15,000 deposit never appeared in our standard escrow account. I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. When I traced the transaction, I found the money had been transferred to a personal account controlled by my father. How did your father respond when you brought this to his attention? He dismissed it as a banking error and told me he would handle it personally. But the money was never returned to the proper account, and when I pressed the issue, he became defensive and suggested I was being careless with my responsibilities. We continued through the litany of crimes I'd discovered: the Williams bathroom project, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the systematic use of client deposits to fund personal expenses. Each answer felt like hammering another nail into Gerald's coffin, but also like providing justice for families who'd trusted him with their dreams and savings. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal but expected. He painted me as a disgruntled son seeking revenge against a father who'd favored his brother. He questioned my motives, my professional competence, and my decision to cooperate with federal investigators. Isn't it true, Mr. Morrison, that you were angry about being excluded from management decisions in the family business? He asked. No, I replied firmly. I was concerned about criminal activities that were putting innocent families at risk and using my professional credentials to legitimize theft. But you chose to work with federal agents rather than addressing these alleged concerns within your family. I tried to address them within my family for 6 months. When that failed and I realized the scope of the harm being done to clients, I had no choice but to seek outside help. The defense attorney spent 2 hours trying to undermine my credibility, but the documentary evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged documents, victim statements, and recorded conversations created an unassailable case. Then came the moment that shocked everyone in the courtroom, including me. Your Honor, the defense attorney announced, we call Marcus Morrison to the stand. I turned to see my brother walking toward the witness stand wearing a suit I'd never seen before, and an expression of grim determination. The last time we'd spoken, he was screaming accusations at me in a hospital waiting room. Now he was being called as a defense witness for the father we'd both worked to protect and expose. But as Marcus took the oath and settled into the witness chair, something unexpected happened. Instead of defending Gerald, he began providing additional evidence of crimes I'd never discovered. Mr. Morrison, the defense attorney began, can you describe your father's character and business practices? Marcus looked directly at Gerald, then at me, then at the jury. My father is a criminal who's been stealing from families for at least 5 years, not just the 2 years the prosecution has documented. The courtroom erupted. The defense attorney's face went white. Gerald slumped in his chair like he'd been shot. Even Attorney Walsh looked surprised by Marcus's unexpected testimony. Your Honor, the defense attorney stammered, I need a moment to consult with my client. But Marcus continued talking. I have documentation of additional crimes that haven't been presented to this court. Construction projects from 2018 and 2019, where families lost their entire savings because my father stole their deposits and never completed the work. The judge called for order, but Marcus kept talking. I helped him do it because I thought family loyalty meant protecting criminals. But watching my brother choose victims over family taught me that real loyalty means choosing justice. It took several minutes to restore order in the courtroom. During the recess, I learned what had happened. Marcus's own legal troubles had forced him to examine the full scope of Gerald's crimes. Facing potential federal charges, he'd made the same choice I had, protecting innocent victims over protecting guilty family members. His testimony lasted 3 days and revealed criminal activities that extended far beyond anything the federal investigation had uncovered. Additional victims, more sophisticated money laundering connections to other fraudulent contractors, and evidence that Gerald had been planning to expand into commercial real estate fraud. The prosecution team scrambled to incorporate Marcus's new evidence into their case. Additional charges were filed. More victims were identified. What had been a substantial criminal prosecution became a massive financial crime case with implications for multiple states. When Patricia took the stand to describe her own investigation and documentation efforts, the emotional impact on the jury was visible. Here was a woman who'd discovered her husband was stealing from her own sister, who'd spent 2 years secretly building a case for justice, who'd sacrificed her marriage and family stability to protect innocent victims. Mrs. Morrison. Attorney Walsh asked, "Why didn't you report your husband's crimes immediately upon discovering them?" "Because stopping him wouldn't have helped the families he'd already hurt," Patricia replied. "I wanted to make sure that when justice came, it came completely. Every stolen dollar recovered, every victim compensated, every crime properly documented." Gerald's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence testimony and his own family's decision to choose justice over criminal loyalty. His lawyers eventually advised him to plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence, but by then it was too late. The trial had become a public examination of how financial crimes destroy families and communities. During sentencing, Gerald was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood slowly, looking older than his 62 years, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I have no excuses for what I've done," he said. "I stole from people who trusted me. I betrayed my family's name. I destroyed my relationships with my sons. I deserve whatever punishment this court decides." The judge sentenced Gerald to 12 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution to all victims. The Morrison construction business assets were liquidated with proceeds going to a victim compensation fund. The house where I'd grown up was sold to help repay the families Gerald had defrauded. As we left the courthouse after sentencing, Marcus approached me for the first time since his arrest. "Nelson," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. You tried to do the right thing from the beginning, and I fought you every step of the way." "We both learned some hard lessons," I replied. "The important thing is that the families got their money back." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we try to build something better than what we tore down," I said. 2 years after Gerald's sentencing, I stood in the conference room of Morrison Victim Recovery Services looking at a letter that had arrived that morning. The return address showed Mrs. Margaret Thompson, my aunt, who'd been one of Gerald's first victims. The letter was brief but profound. "Dear Nelson, I wanted you to know that the renovation of my bathroom was finally completed last month, using the restitution funds. More importantly, I wanted to thank you for having the courage to choose what was right over what was easy. Your father stole my money, but you gave me back my faith in family." Patricia, who now served as the director of our victim advocacy program, read the letter over my shoulder. "She's not the only one," she said, gesturing toward a thick file of similar correspondence. "We've received thank you letters from every family that received restitution." The Morrison Victim Recovery Services had been my idea, but it had become something much larger than I'd originally envisioned. Using my expertise in forensic accounting and Patricia's experience in victim advocacy, we'd created a nonprofit organization that helped families affected by contractor fraud, financial abuse, and white-collar crime. Our work extended far beyond Gerald's victims. We provided free consulting services to help families identify fraudulent contractors, assisted law enforcement agencies with complex financial investigations, and offered support groups for people dealing with the emotional trauma of being victimized by trusted individuals. Marcus had been released after serving 18 months and had joined our organization as a construction project consultant. His insider knowledge of contractor fraud techniques combined with genuine remorse for his participation in Gerald's crimes made him uniquely qualified to help families avoid similar victimization. "The Hendersons called this morning," Marcus said, entering the conference room with his own stack of correspondence. Their kitchen renovation was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. They wanted to express their appreciation for helping them find an honest contractor. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The Morrison family name, once associated with theft and betrayal, was being rebuilt as a symbol of justice and recovery. We were using the skills Gerald had taught us, but applying them to protect families rather than exploit them. Jake Morrison, the undercover FBI agent who'd helped expose Gerald's crimes, had left federal service and joined our organization as chief financial officer. His law enforcement background and accounting expertise ensured that our operations remained transparent and accountable. The state attorney general's office called, Jake announced, settling into his chair with obvious satisfaction. "They want us to consult on a multi-state contractor fraud investigation. Apparently, our reputation for thorough financial analysis has reached some important people." Our success had attracted attention from law enforcement agencies, victim advocacy groups, and legal professionals across the country. What started as an effort to help Gerald's specific victims had evolved into a recognized center of excellence for white-collar crime recovery. But the real measure of our success wasn't professional recognition or organizational growth. It was the individual families whose lives had been rebuilt through justice and restitution. The Kowalski family's son now had his wheelchair-accessible bathroom completed by honest contractors using restitution funds. Mr. Martinez had rebuilt his fire-damaged home and started a small business helping other families navigate insurance claims. Mrs. Thompson had remained in the home she'd shared with her late husband for 53 years, safe and independent in her specially renovated bathroom. Each success story represented more than financial recovery. These families had learned that being victimized by criminals didn't make them powerless. They'd discovered that justice, while sometimes slow, was possible when good people chose courage over convenience. Patricia had finalized her divorce from Gerald and moved into a modest apartment near our offices. The woman who'd spent 2 years secretly documenting her husband's crimes had found purpose in helping other families navigate similar betrayals. "I received a letter from Gerald yesterday," she told me as we reviewed the day's case files. "He's eligible for parole in 6 years and wanted to know if there was any possibility of reconciliation." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "That reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm done and genuine efforts to make amends," she replied. "He's spent 2 years in prison and still hasn't written a single letter of apology to any of the families he victimized." Gerald's refusal to take responsibility for the human cost of his crimes had been consistent throughout his incarceration. While Marcus and I had dedicated ourselves to rebuilding what he'd destroyed, Gerald remained focused on his own grievances and self-pity. Marcus's transformation had been remarkable. The angry, entitled young man who'd attacked me in a hospital waiting room had become a thoughtful advocate for crime victims. His testimony in subsequent fraud cases had helped secure convictions against other dishonest contractors, and his construction expertise had saved families thousands of dollars in unnecessary expenses. "I've been thinking about something," Marcus said during our weekly team meeting. "What if we established a scholarship program for young people who want to study construction management or accounting? We could teach them about ethical business practices and help them understand the real-world impact of financial crimes." The idea was brilliant. By educating the next generation of business professionals, we could help prevent future victims while honoring the memory of those who'd been hurt by our family's crimes. Jake immediately began researching the legal and financial requirements for establishing an educational foundation. Patricia started contacting local colleges and trade schools about curriculum development. Marcus began drafting course outlines that would combine technical training with ethical instruction. As I watched my colleagues, my family, and my friends working together to create something positive from our shared trauma, I realized that justice had taken a form I'd never expected. It wasn't just about punishment for criminals or compensation for victims. It was about transformation, growth, and the decision to use painful experiences as foundations for building better futures. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Mr. Morrison, this is David Thompson, Margaret Thompson's grandson. My grandmother gave me your number and suggested I call you." "Of course," I replied. "How can I help you?" "I'm graduating from college next month with a degree in accounting," he said. "I've been following the work your organization does, and I'd like to know if you have any internship opportunities available. I want to learn how to use accounting skills to help families instead of taking advantage of them." I looked around our conference room at Marcus preparing educational materials, Patricia reviewing victim advocacy protocols, and Jake analyzing financial records for a new case. 3 years ago, we'd been a family torn apart by crime and betrayal. Today, we were a team dedicated to justice and recovery. And, I said, "I think we can definitely find a place for someone who understands the importance of using professional skills to protect people rather than exploit them. When can you start, you?" As I hung up the phone and returned to preparing for our afternoon case review, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. The family intervention that had driven me away from home had ultimately led me toward a purpose I'd never imagined. The brother who'd once attacked me for exposing crimes had become my closest colleague in preventing them. The mother who'd pretended to reject me had been secretly orchestrating the largest financial recovery operation in our state's history. Most importantly, the families who'd trusted Gerald Morrison with their dreams and savings had received not just financial restitution, but also the knowledge that their suffering had meaning. Their victimization had exposed a criminal enterprise, led to the creation of a victim advocacy organization, and resulted in new protections for future families. The deep life lesson that emerged from our family's destruction and reconstruction was simple, but profound. Real loyalty isn't about protecting people who do wrong things. Real loyalty is about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Family isn't defined by shared genetics or names. Family is defined by shared values and mutual commitment to doing what's right, especially when doing what's right is difficult. As I prepared to close another successful case and help another family rebuild their lives, I understood that the work we were doing wasn't just about recovering stolen money. It was about recovering stolen faith in justice, stolen trust in humanity, and stolen hope for the future. Gerald Morrison had spent 30 years building a legacy of theft and betrayal, but from the ashes of his criminal enterprise, we were building something infinitely more valuable, a legacy of justice, recovery, and redemption that would protect families for generations to come. The man who'd once told me our family would be better off without me had been wrong about many things. But perhaps his most profound error was failing to understand that families aren't built on blind loyalty to shared crimes. They're built on shared commitment to protecting innocent people, seeking justice for victims, and creating better futures for everyone who comes after us. In the end, we hadn't just survived our family's destruction. We'd used it as an opportunity to build something better than what we'd lost. And that transformation, more than any courtroom victory or financial recovery, represented the true triumph of justice over betrayal. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing meant going against the people closest to you? How do you balance family loyalty with moral responsibility when those two values come into conflict? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the complex choices that define our character. Share this with someone who might need to hear that choosing justice over convenience, even when it's difficult, is always the right decision. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful victories.